The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Colonel Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her vehicle. At 48 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and determination. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her pressed uniform showed 26 years of dedicated service to the United States Marine Corps. Sarah had been reassigned to Camp Pendleton to oversee a critical training operation. After spending the last 3 years at the Pentagon, she was glad to be back in the field, back where real Marines trained and sweated and became the warriors America needed. She grabbed her briefcase and walked toward the administrative building, her shoes clicking against the pavement. Inside, the air conditioning provided relief from the California heat. Sarah approached the front desk where a young Lance Corporal sat shuffling papers. He looked up, his eyes barely registering her presence. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, the word ma'am sounding more dismissive than respectful. "I'm Colonel Mitchell. I'm here to meet with Major Barnes about the training operations." The Lance Corporal's eyebrows rose slightly. "Colonel, you sure about that?" Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Even after all these years, it still happened. "I'm quite sure, Lance Corporal. Would you please direct me to Major Barnes' office?" The young Marine smirked. "Down the hall, third door on the right. But I think maybe you got your rank wrong, ma'am. We don't see many female colonels around here." Sarah chose not to respond. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. She walked down the hallway, her jaw set, her eyes forward. Behind her, she heard the Lance Corporal chuckle and mutter something to a colleague. Major Barnes turned out to be a barrel-chested man in his mid-30s with a firm handshake and a professional demeanor. He stood when Sarah entered his office and gave her a crisp salute. "Colonel Mitchell, it's an honor. I've read about your service record, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. You led the evacuation at Forward Operating Base Marlin. That was incredible work." Sarah returned the salute and relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Major. I'm here to do a job just like everyone else." They spent the next hour discussing the training operation. A new counterinsurgency program was being implemented, and Sarah had been chosen to oversee it because of her extensive field experience. Major Barnes was thorough and asked intelligent questions. Sarah began to feel hopeful that this assignment would go smoothly. But as she left Barnes' office and walked through the base, she noticed the stairs. Groups of young Marines would stop talking as she passed, then resume in hushed whispers. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked confused, as if they couldn't quite place her or understand why she was there. At the mess hall during lunch, Sarah sat alone at a table, reviewing documents while she ate. She was used to solitude. In her years of service, she'd learned that being a woman in the Marines often meant being on an island, even when surrounded by fellow service members. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Sarah looked up to see a gunnery sergeant, a man about her age with weather-beaten features and kind eyes. His name tape read Kowalski. "Please sit down," Sarah said. Gunny Kowalski sat across from her. "I wanted to introduce myself. I'm running the weapons training for your program. I served with Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez. He told me if I ever had the chance to work with you, I should consider myself lucky." Sarah smiled, genuinely touched. "Rodriguez is a good man. How's he doing?" "Retired now, living in Texas with his grandkids." Kowalski paused. "I wanted to give you a heads-up, Colonel. There's been some talk among the men. Some of the younger Marines, they don't understand. They see a woman in your position and they think it's political, you know? Diversity quotas and all that nonsense." Sarah nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning, Gunny." "For what it's worth, ma'am, those of us who have been around, who have seen real combat, we know better. We know you don't get to be a colonel by checking boxes. You get there by being the best." After lunch, Sarah headed to the training grounds where she was scheduled to observe the current protocols. As she walked across the field, she noticed a group of Marines gathered near the obstacle course. One of them, a muscular staff sergeant with a sharp face, was speaking loudly enough for her to hear. "I'm telling you it's a joke," the staff sergeant said. His name tape identified him as Hayes. "They're putting a woman in charge of combat training. What's next? Sensitivity training before we go into battle." Several Marines laughed. Sarah kept walking, but Hayes's voice grew louder. "I mean, look at her. She probably got promoted by sitting behind a desk filling out paperwork. I bet she's never even seen real action." Sarah stopped. She turned and walked directly toward the group. The Marines fell silent as she approached, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to defiance. Staff Sergeant Hayes straightened up, but his jaw remained set in a stubborn line. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," Sarah said calmly, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Hayes's eyes met hers with barely concealed contempt. "Just speaking my mind, ma'am. No disrespect intended." "No disrespect," Sarah kept her voice level. "You just questioned my qualifications, my experience, and my right to be here. That sounds like disrespect to me." A crowd was gathering now. Other Marines were drifting over, sensing confrontation. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, could sense them choosing sides. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed eager to see how this would play out. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Hayes continued, emboldened by his audience. "The Corps is changing, and not for the better. We're supposed to be warriors, not a social experiment." Sarah took a step closer. "Tell me, Staff Sergeant, where did you serve?" "2 deployments, Afghanistan both times." "And you saw combat?" "Yes, ma'am, plenty of it." Sarah nodded. "Then you know that in combat, the only thing that matters is whether the person next to you can do their job, whether they can lead when it counts, whether they'll stand firm when everything goes to hell." She paused. "You know what I learned in my 3 deployments? That courage doesn't care about gender, neither does a bullet." Hayes's face reddened. "With all due respect, Colonel, sitting in a command tent isn't the same as being on the ground." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "It's not the same, but I've done both. March of 2010. I was a captain then, leading a platoon. We got ambushed in a compound, lost 3 good Marines that day, and 5 more were wounded. I carried Corporal James 200 yards under fire because he'd taken shrapnel to both legs. So don't tell me about being on the ground, Staff Sergeant." The area had gone completely silent. Hayes's face showed a flicker of uncertainty, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "Anyone can tell war stories," he muttered. Before Sarah could respond, Gunny Kowalski stepped forward from the crowd. "I can verify that story, Hayes. I was there. I saw Colonel Mitchell, Captain Mitchell then, save James's life. I also saw her organize our defense and get us out of that kill zone. 4 hours of continuous contact with the enemy, and she never lost her cool." Hayes looked away, his jaw clenched. Sarah addressed the gathered Marines. "I didn't come here to prove myself to anyone. I came here to do my job, which is to make sure you're prepared for what you'll face out there. You can think whatever you want about me, about women in the military, about the Corps changing. But when we start this training program, I expect every one of you to give it everything you've got. Because the skills you learn here might save your life or the life of the Marine next to you. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, ma'am" echoed across the training ground, though not everyone sounded convinced. Sarah walked away, her heart pounding. She'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than she felt right now. Combat was straightforward. You knew who the enemy was, and you knew what you had to do. This was different. This was fighting for respect from the very people she was supposed to lead. That evening, Sarah sat in her temporary quarters, a small room in the bachelor officer quarters. She'd unpacked only the essentials: uniforms, toiletries, a framed photo of her late husband, Michael. He'd been a Marine too, killed by an IED in Iraq 12 years ago. They'd never had children, had always planned to wait until after their service. Now Sarah was alone, married to the Corps, with nothing but memories and the mission. Her phone rang. It was Major Barnes. "Colonel, I heard about the incident with Hayes this afternoon." Sarah sighed. "Word travels fast." "It always does. Listen, I want you to know that you have my full support. Hayes is a good Marine, but he's got some outdated ideas. I'll speak with him." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Let it go. He needs to come around on his own if he's going to come around at all. I don't want anyone thinking I need protecting." Barnes was quiet for a moment. "Understood, but for what it's worth, most of the Marines here respect you. The younger ones just need time to see what you can do." After hanging up, Sarah tried to read but couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about Hayes, about the laughter she'd heard, about the looks she'd gotten. She'd climbed so high in a world that didn't always want her, and still, she had to prove herself again and again. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the training grounds. She wanted to observe the current training regime before implementing changes. The Marines were running drills, and she stood on the sideline taking notes. Staff Sergeant Hayes was leading one of the squads through an urban warfare exercise. Sarah had to admit he was good. He was sharp, tactical, and his Marines responded well to his commands. But she also noticed inefficiencies, outdated tactics that needed updating based on current battlefield intelligence. After the exercise, Sarah called Hayes over. "Good drill, Staff Sergeant. Your squad is well trained." Hayes looked surprised. "Thank you, ma'am. But I noticed you're still using the 2015 approach to room clearing. We've learned a lot since then. I'd like to show you some updated tactics that have been proven effective in recent operations." Hayes's expression hardened. "My methods work fine, Colonel." "I'm sure they do, but we can always improve. That's why I'm here." For the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked tirelessly. She observed every training session, made detailed notes, and began implementing changes. Some Marines embraced the new approaches. Others resisted, Hayes chief among them. The tension came to a head during a particularly difficult exercise. Sarah had designed a complex scenario based on a real operation she'd commanded in Afghanistan. The Marines were struggling, making mistakes that would have gotten them killed in actual combat. Sarah stopped the exercise. "Reset, we're going again." Hayes stepped forward. "Colonel, these men have been running drills all day. They're exhausted." "And you think the enemy cares if you're tired, Staff Sergeant? You think insurgents wait until you've had a good night's sleep?" "No, ma'am, but—" "Then we run it again, and we'll keep running it until they get it right." The Marines ran the drill 4 more times. Each time, Sarah pointed out mistakes, corrected approaches, and pushed them harder. By the end, they were exhausted and frustrated. Sarah could see the resentment in their eyes, could hear the grumbling as they filed away. That night, as Sarah walked back to her quarters, she overheard voices behind one of the buildings. She recognized Hayes's voice. "She's trying to break us," he was saying. "This is what happens when someone who's never really been in the shit tries to tell real warriors how to fight." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to confront him, to drag him into the light and demand he repeat those words to her face. But she'd learned patience over the years. She'd learned that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Instead, she went to her quarters and pulled out her laptop. She spent the next 3 hours writing a detailed report on the training progress, including specific notes on each Marine's performance. Despite her anger, she was fair in her assessments. Even Hayes received credit where it was due. The breakthrough came unexpectedly 2 days later. The Marines were running a live-fire exercise when one of the younger privates, Morrison, made a critical error. He exposed himself in a way that would have been fatal in real combat. Sarah immediately called a halt. Private Morrison, front and center. The young Marine approached, his face pale. He was barely 20 years old, fresh-faced and scared. "Do you know what you just did wrong?" Sarah asked. "Yes, ma'am. I moved without checking my angles." "And in a real firefight, what would have happened?" Morrison swallowed hard. "I'd be dead, ma'am." Sarah nodded. Then, to everyone's surprise, she grabbed a rifle from the rack. "Everyone, watch closely. I'm going to show you exactly why Morrison's mistake was fatal, and then I'm going to show you the right way." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah moved through the exercise herself. She demonstrated proper clearing techniques, how to use cover, how to maintain fields of fire while advancing. Her movements were fluid, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who'd done this countless times in situations where mistakes meant death. The Marines watched in silence. Even Hayes seemed transfixed. When Sarah finished, she was breathing hard but steady. She turned to the group. "This isn't about being hard on you. This isn't about proving anything. This is about making sure you come home. Every tactic I'm teaching you, I learned because someone didn't come home. Someone made a mistake, paid for it with their life, and the rest of us learned from it. I'm trying to give you their wisdom without you having to pay their price." The mood shifted after that. The Marines began to engage more seriously with the training. They asked questions, sought clarification, pushed themselves harder. Sarah saw the change and felt a cautious hope. But Hayes remained distant, correct but cold in his interactions with her. 3 weeks into the training program, Sarah received unexpected news. Admiral James Thornton, commander of the Pacific Fleet, was making an inspection tour of West Coast installations. He would be visiting Camp Pendleton in 2 days. Major Barnes called Sarah to his office. "The Admiral specifically asked to observe your training program. Apparently, he's heard about the new counterinsurgency protocols you're implementing." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Did he say anything else? Barnes shook his head. Just that he wants a full demonstration. Colonel, this is a big opportunity. If the Admiral likes what he sees, this program could be rolled out corps-wide. Your name would be attached to that. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Sarah refined the exercises, briefed the Marines, and made sure everything was perfect. She barely slept, running through scenarios in her mind, anticipating questions the Admiral might ask. The morning of the Admiral's visit, Sarah stood at attention with the other officers as Admiral Thornton arrived. He was a tall man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd commanded ships and men for decades. His uniform was crisp, his shoes gleamed, and his eyes missed nothing. As he walked down the line of officers, Sarah kept her eyes forward. When he reached her, he stopped. "Colonel Mitchell." "Admiral Thornton, sir." He studied her for a long moment. "I've been reading about your program, interesting approach, unconventional in some ways." "Yes, sir, based on recent field experience and updated intelligence on enemy tactics. We'll see how it works in practice." He moved on, leaving Sarah uncertain whether that was approval or skepticism. The demonstration began an hour later. Sarah had selected a mixed group of Marines, including some who'd been most resistant to the new training. She wanted to show authentic results, not a hand-picked team. The exercise was complex, a hostage rescue scenario in a mock urban environment. The Marines had to navigate multiple buildings, neutralize hostile forces, and extract civilians without casualties. Sarah stood next to Admiral Thornton, providing commentary as the Marines moved through the exercise. She pointed out tactical decisions, explained the reasoning behind certain approaches, and highlighted where the new training had improved performance. The exercise went smoothly until the Marines reached the third building. Suddenly, one of the hostile role players threw an unexpected variable into the scenario, a tactic Sarah had specifically taught them to handle, but one that required quick thinking and coordination. For a moment, the Marines hesitated. Sarah held her breath. Then Staff Sergeant Hayes's voice crackled over the radio, calm and authoritative. "Second team, flank left using the Mitchell approach. First team, suppressing fire on my mark. Third team, prepare for breach." It was the first time Sarah had heard Hayes reference her by name, the first acknowledgement that he'd been listening, learning. The Marines executed the maneuver perfectly, adapting the techniques Sarah had taught them to the unexpected situation. The exercise concluded successfully. Admiral Thornton nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Impressive, Colonel. Your Marines showed excellent tactical flexibility. That last scenario, that wasn't in the original plan, was it?" "No, sir. I had the role players prepared to throw curveballs. Combat never goes according to plan." "No, it doesn't." The Admiral turned to face her directly. "Walk with me, Colonel." Sarah fell into step beside Admiral Thornton as they walked away from the training area. Her heart was pounding. This could be praise or criticism, and with admirals, you never knew until they spoke. "How long have you been in the Corps, Colonel?" Thornton asked. 26 years, sir." "And you've had to fight for every one of them, haven't you?" Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "Sir." Thornton stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know what it's like, Colonel. Not personally, I've had my own battles, but not the same kind as yours. My daughter is a Navy pilot. Commander now, flying FA-18s off carriers. The stories she tells me about what she's had to endure, the constant need to prove herself, to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified." He paused. "I've watched talented officers leave the service because they got tired of fighting their own side harder than they ever fought the enemy." Sarah didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. "I pulled your full service record," Thornton continued. "It's remarkable. 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. You've commanded at every level from platoon to battalion. You've got tactical expertise and strategic vision. And yet I'd wager that today, watching your own Marines execute a drill, part of you was still worried they'd fail just to make you look bad." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Sir, I also pulled the incident reports from your first 3 weeks here. The confrontations, the resistance, the subtle and not-so-subtle undermining of your authority." Thornton's voice hardened. "It's unacceptable. This isn't about you proving yourself, Colonel. You've already done that. This is about Marines who need to remember what the Corps is supposed to be about." He started walking again, and Sarah followed. They headed toward where the Marines were gathering after the exercise, still in their tactical gear, faces flushed with exertion and success. "I want you to understand something," Thornton said. "What I saw today wasn't just good training, it was exceptional. The tactical innovations you've introduced, the way you've adapted doctrine based on real-world experience, the mental resilience you've built into the program. This is exactly what the Corps needs. I'm recommending that your protocols be adopted for all advanced infantry training across the Marine Corps." Sarah stopped walking. "Sir, you heard me, this program works, and more importantly, you work. You're exactly the kind of leader we need." He paused. "But I'm also going to address the cultural issues you've faced here. That ends today." They reached the gathered Marines. Major Barnes called them to attention, and everyone snapped into formation. Admiral Thornton walked to the front of the group, his hands clasped behind his back. "Marines," he began, his voice carrying easily across the field. "I've spent 38 years in the United States Navy. I've served with the best warriors this nation has to offer from all branches of service. Today, I witnessed training that ranks among the finest I've ever seen. Colonel Mitchell has created a program that will save lives and make you better Marines." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I've also heard things during my time here. Comments, whispers, doubts about Colonel Mitchell's qualifications, her experience, her right to lead you." His voice took on an edge. "Let me be absolutely clear. Colonel Sarah Mitchell has forgotten more about combat leadership than most of you will ever learn. She's been in firefights where the decisions she made meant the difference between her Marines coming home or coming home in boxes. She's earned her rank through blood and sacrifice." Sarah felt her face flush. She wasn't used to this kind of public defense. Thornton continued. "I know change is hard. I know that seeing leadership that doesn't look like what you're used to can be unsettling. But the Marine Corps doesn't belong to any one group. It belongs to every American willing to serve with honor, courage, and commitment. When you question Colonel Mitchell's qualifications based on anything other than her performance, you dishonor those values." He turned and scanned the faces before him. Sarah saw some Marines looking ashamed. Others stood straighter, as if the Admiral's words had lifted a weight from their shoulders. Hayes stood rigid, his eyes forward, his jaw tight. "From this moment forward," Thornton said, "I expect every Marine here to give Colonel Mitchell the respect her rank and her service have earned. Not because I'm ordering you to, but because it's the right thing to do. Because she's proven herself 100 times over. And because if you're lucky enough to serve under her command, you're going to be better for it." The Admiral turned to Sarah. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Then, with perfect military precision, Admiral James Thornton raised his hand in a crisp salute. Sarah returned the salute, her hand steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. "Thank you for your service, Colonel Mitchell," Thornton said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Corps is better because you're in it." The Admiral held the salute for a long moment, a gesture of profound respect that every Marine present understood. When he finally dropped his hand, he turned back to the assembled Marines. "Dismissed." As the formation broke up, Sarah stood rooted to the spot. Thornton gave her a brief nod, then walked toward the waiting vehicles with Major Barnes. Sarah watched him go, overwhelmed by what had just happened. "Colonel." She turned to find Staff Sergeant Hayes standing a few feet away. His expression was difficult to read. "Staff Sergeant." Hayes took a breath. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, a big one I've been." He struggled for words. "I've been an ass, frankly. I let my own biases blind me to what you were actually doing here. That exercise today, the way you've trained us, it's good, really good. And I should have seen that from the beginning instead of fighting you every step of the way." Sarah studied him carefully. "Why the change of heart?" "Honestly, watching you run that drill yourself, and hearing your explanation about why you push us so hard, I realized you weren't trying to prove anything to us. You were trying to keep us alive." He paused. "My younger brother is deploying next month, infantry heading to the Middle East. I want him to have the kind of training you're giving us. I want him to learn from someone who's actually been there and knows what it takes to survive and bring everyone home." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I appreciate that, Staff Sergeant, and I appreciate your honesty." Hayes nodded. "I'd like to request permission to help you refine the program. I know I've been resistant, but I do have field experience that might be valuable, if you'll have me." "I'd welcome your input," Sarah said, and she meant it. The weeks following Admiral Thornton's visit brought a transformation that Sarah had barely dared to hope for. The resistance that had met her at every turn began to crumble. Marines who had whispered behind her back now sought her guidance openly. The training program flourished as the participants began to truly engage with the material. Staff Sergeant Hayes became one of Sarah's most valuable assets. His tactical experience, combined with his newfound willingness to embrace new approaches, made him an excellent instructor. More importantly, his change of heart influenced other skeptical Marines. If Hayes, who had been vocal in his doubts, could see the value in Colonel Mitchell's leadership, maybe they'd been wrong too. Sarah found herself working closely with Hayes to refine the urban warfare components of the training. One afternoon, as they reviewed footage from a recent exercise, Hayes spoke up. "Colonel, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah looked up from the laptop. "Go ahead." "That operation in Marja, the one Gunny Kowalski mentioned, the one where you saved Corporal James." Hayes paused. "How did you keep it together? 4 hours under fire, Marines wounded, the situation going to hell. How did you not freeze up?" Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Honestly, I was terrified, but I had a platoon sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the Rodriguez I mentioned before. She told me something during my first deployment. She said, 'Fear is fine. Fear keeps you sharp, but you can't let the Marines see you controlled by it. They need to see strength even if you have to fake it.'" "And you faked it?" "For the first hour or so, absolutely. But then something shifted. The training took over. All those drills I'd run 1,000 times, all the scenarios I'd studied, they became automatic. My mind cleared and I just did the job." Sarah met Hayes's eyes. "That's what I'm trying to give these Marines, the kind of training that becomes instinct. So when everything goes sideways, they don't have to think, they just act." Hayes nodded slowly. "I get it now. I wish I'd gotten it sooner." "You're here now, that's what matters." 2 months into the program, Sarah received word that a congressional delegation would be visiting Camp Pendleton. They were conducting a review of military readiness and wanted to see innovative training programs. Once again, Sarah's counterinsurgency course was put in the spotlight. The night before the visit, Sarah barely slept. This was different from the Admiral's inspection. Politicians brought a different kind of scrutiny, often focused more on optics than substance. She worried they'd see a woman running combat training and turn it into a political talking point, either for or against her, without truly understanding the work being done. Her fears proved partially founded. When the congressional delegation arrived, 3 representatives and 2 senators, their questions initially focused on diversity initiatives and gender integration policies. Sarah answered politely, but tried to steer the conversation back to the actual training methodology. "With respect, sir," she told one representative who kept pushing the diversity angle, "this program succeeds because it's built on sound tactical principles and real combat experience. The gender of the instructor is irrelevant. What matters is whether it works." One of the senators, a woman named Patricia Hendricks who'd served in the Army herself years ago, smiled at that. "Well said, Colonel. Why don't you show us what you've built here?" The demonstration went flawlessly. The Marines executed their drills with precision and confidence that was evident even to civilian observers. Sarah walked the delegation through each phase of the training, explaining the reasoning behind every tactic, every innovation. When Private Morrison, the same young Marine who'd made the critical error weeks before, executed a perfect room-clearing sequence, Sarah felt a surge of pride. These Marines had come so far. After the demonstration, Senator Hendricks approached Sarah privately. "That was impressive, Colonel, truly impressive. I'm going to make sure the Armed Services Committee hears about this program." "Thank you, Senator." Hendricks lowered her voice. "I also want you to know that I understand what you're dealing with, the resistance, the constant need to prove yourself. I faced it 30 years ago, and I'm sorry to see it still happening. But you're handling it with more grace than I did." "Some days are easier than others," Sarah admitted. "I'm sure they are, but you're making a difference. These young Marines, they're learning more than tactics from you. They're learning that leadership comes in many forms. That's valuable in ways that go beyond combat training." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's program became the standard that other training units aspired to match. Marines who completed her course were in high demand for deployment assignments. Command staff from other bases visited to observe and learn. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the program began, Sarah received an email. It was from Corporal James, the Marine she'd saved in Marja 15 years earlier. He'd heard about her program and wanted to thank her, not just for saving his life all those years ago, but for continuing to save lives through the training she was providing. "I'm a gunnery sergeant now," he wrote, "stationed at Camp Lejeune. I run training drills with my Marines, and I use the lessons you taught me about staying calm under fire, about never leaving anyone behind, about leading from the front. I probably never told you what it meant that you carried me out of that compound. I was convinced I was going to die there, but you wouldn't let that happen. You risked your own life to save mine. I think about that every time I put on this uniform. You showed me what a Marine really is. I try to pass that on to the Marines I train." Sarah read the email 3 times, then sat at her desk and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that the sacrifices, the struggles, the constant battle to prove herself, it had all meant something. She'd made a difference. She was still making a difference. The formal end of the training program came with a graduation ceremony. All the Marines who'd completed the course stood in formation, their dress blues immaculate, their bearing proud. Major Barnes presided over the ceremony, but he'd invited Sarah to speak. She stood before the assembled Marines, looking at faces that had become familiar over the past 6 months. She saw Hayes, standing tall, his initial hostility transformed into mutual respect. She saw Morrison, the young private who'd grown in confidence and skill. She saw dozens of others, each with their own story, their own journey. "When I arrived here 6 months ago," Sarah began, "I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew I had knowledge to share, experience to pass on. But I also knew that I'd face challenges that had nothing to do with tactics or training methodology." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Some of you doubted me. Some of you questioned whether I belonged here, whether I could teach you anything useful. That's okay. Skepticism isn't inherently bad, but what matters is what you did with that doubt. Most of you chose to look past your preconceptions and judge me based on the work itself. You gave the training a chance. You gave me a chance. And together we created something valuable." Sarah looked directly at Hayes. "I learned from you too. Your field experience, your tactical knowledge, your willingness to question approaches and suggest improvements, that made this program better. This wasn't me teaching you. This was all of us learning together." She swept her gaze across the formation. "You're about to graduate from this program and move on to your next assignments. Some of you will deploy. Some will train other Marines. Wherever you go, remember that the strongest units are the ones where every Marine is valued for what they bring to the fight, where leadership is judged by competence, not appearance, where respect is earned through action, not assumed based on rank or background." Her voice grew stronger. "You are United States Marines. That means something. It means you stand for honor, courage, and commitment. It means you protect those who cannot protect themselves. It means you never leave a fallen comrade behind. And it means you treat every fellow Marine with the respect they deserve because you're all part of something bigger than yourselves." Sarah came to attention. "It has been my honor to train you. Now go forward and make the Corps proud. Semper Fi." "Semper Fi," the Marines roared back. After the ceremony, as Sarah was packing up her materials, Staff Sergeant Hayes approached one final time. "Colonel, I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on us, for not giving up on me even when I was being an idiot." Sarah smiled. "You weren't an idiot, Hayes. You were a Marine who cared deeply about the Corps and wanted to make sure it stayed strong. That's admirable, even if your initial approach was flawed." "I have a favor to ask," Hayes said. "My brother completed his deployment. He's coming home next month, safe and sound. I'd like him to meet you. I want him to know that there are leaders like you in the Corps, leaders who actually give a damn about bringing everyone home." "I'd be honored," Sarah said. As she drove away from Camp Pendleton that evening, Sarah reflected on the past 6 months. She'd faced resistance, doubt, and prejudice. She'd fought battles that had nothing to do with tactics or enemy forces. But she'd also witnessed transformation. She'd seen skeptics become allies. She'd watched a group of Marines grow from resistant students to skilled, confident warriors. Most importantly, she'd proven, once again, that leadership had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with competence, dedication, and the willingness to do whatever it took to accomplish the mission and protect the people under your command. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Major Barnes. "Admiral Thornton called. Your program is being implemented Corps-wide. They're also considering you for promotion to Brigadier General. Congratulations, Colonel, you've earned it." Sarah pulled over and read the message again. Brigadier General. 1 star. Another ceiling shattered, another barrier broken, not through quotas or politics, but through the same thing that had gotten her this far: hard work, dedication, and results. She thought about the young women who would follow her path, the ones who'd join the Marines and wonder if they could make it, if they could lead, if they'd ever be accepted. She thought about how Admiral Thornton's salute had meant more than any medal, because it was a public acknowledgement of her worth from someone who had the courage to stand up and say it. Sarah put the car back in gear and headed toward her next assignment. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more people to prove wrong, but she'd faced worse odds before. She was a United States Marine, and she'd never learned how to quit. The sun was setting over the California coast, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Sarah drove toward it, toward whatever came next, knowing that she'd made her mark, not just on the training program or the Marines she'd taught, but on the Corps itself. And that, she thought, was worth every struggle, every doubt, every moment when she'd wanted to give up but didn't. That was worth everything,